Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to be historical detectives. Our big mission? To figure out how on earth we know anything about the ancient history of a place like Sri Lanka. It's this amazing story of piecing together a giant centuries-old puzzle. So where do you even start? Let's dive in.
Okay, so this is the big question, right? It's really easy to think of history as just this big book of facts, but the truth is, the past doesn't just hand us its story on a silver platter. Nope, historians have to piece it all together, kind of like detectives, clue by clue, from whatever's been left behind. But what are those clues, and how do we even begin to read them? The past is literally all around us, in things just like this incredible stone carving. These are the footprints of people who lived thousands of years ago. These aren't just pretty pictures, they're messages. But to understand them, we need a method. We need to know what to look for and, just as important, how to interpret what we find.
All right, let's get into it. Welcome to History's Great Puzzle. First up, we've got to understand what our evidence even is. What are the basic tools historians use to even begin building a picture of a world that's long gone? Okay, so the very first thing in our toolkit is this idea of historical sources. What does that even mean? Well, simply put, it's the raw stuff of history. It's the actual writings, the objects, and the ruins from a specific time period that have somehow survived all the way to today. Think of them as our direct hotline to the past. So, all this evidence, it pretty much gets sorted into two big buckets. On one hand, you've got the stories. These are the literary sources, things like chronicles, poems. This is how the past told its own story. But, stories can be, well, a little biased. And that's exactly why we need the other bucket, the stuff, the archaeological sources. These are the actual physical objects people left behind. Inscriptions, coins, ruins. They can often prove or even challenge the written word. You really, really need both to get anything close to the full picture. Okay, let's start with that first bucket, the written clues. Time to listen for some whispers from the past, for the stories and accounts that were recorded centuries and centuries ago. So, way before paper was a thing, a lot of these vital records were written down on materials like these Ola leaf manuscripts. I mean, isn't it incredible to think that these super detailed histories survived on something so fragile? They were passed down generation after generation through really careful preservation. This isn't just a document, it's a physical link to the very act of telling a story hundreds of years ago. And you can't talk about chronicles in Sri Lanka without talking about the Mahavamsa. So what's the big deal? Well, it's the fact that it's a continuous story. Seriously, almost nowhere else in the ancient world has a single historical record that just keeps going for that long. It gives historians a framework, a timeline of kings and major events, that is just absolutely priceless. But it's not just one type of story, right? You've got the local chronicles, like the Mahavamsa, which is the insider's perspective, what the kingdom wanted to remember about itself, stuff like royal families and big religious events. And then you've got the foreign accounts. These were written by travelers, traders, and diplomats who were just visiting. They were looking at everything with fresh eyes, so they noticed different things, like the busy ports, the goods being traded, and everyday local customs. Every perspective adds a totally new layer to the story. Check this out. Take a guy like Ptolemy, a Roman geographer working in Alexandria. He never even went to Sri Lanka. But just by talking to sailors, he drew this surprisingly accurate map of the island, which he called Taprobane. What does that tell us? It shows that ancient Sri Lanka wasn't some isolated island. It was a known hub, a major player on the world stage, connected into this huge global network. So this all leads to a really important question. Can we just trust everything we read? Think about it. The people writing this stuff had their own agendas, their own point of view. A local writer might exaggerate how great their king was, and a foreign traveler might totally misunderstand a local tradition. So historians can't just read these texts, they have to question them, to pick them apart. And that's exactly why our second pile of evidence is so crucial. So let's move away from the stories and get our hands dirty with the physical clues. The evidence that's literally set in stone. This is kind of like the forensic files part of our investigation. See, unlike a story that might be written down generations later, an inscription carved into rock is a direct message from the past. It's unfiltered, it could be a public announcement, a record of a donation, a royal command, literally set in stone for everyone to see. Honestly, this stuff is pure gold for historians. And get this, not all stone messages are created equal. Where they carved it tells you a lot about why they carved it. An inscription tucked away over a cave was probably a private donation for some months, but one carved on a massive rock out in the open, that was a powerful royal message for everybody to see. The medium itself was part of the message. Pretty smart. And man, when we talk about physical evidence, it really does come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, look at this. On one side, you've got the Golpotha, basically a giant book made of rock that weighs tons. And on the other, a teensy little gold coin. Both of them are just packed with information, giving us clues on these totally different scales, from grand royal history to the day-to-day economy. Okay, let's zoom in on that little coin for a second. It looks simple, but what can it actually tell us? Oh, a ton. The type of metal they used, that tells you about the economy. The quality of the design, that shows you how good they were at metalworking. If you dig up a Roman coin in Sri Lanka, well, boom, that confirms ancient trade routes. And the symbols stamped on it tell you all about their rulers, their religion, and their identity. Okay, let's zoom back out now. Way out. We're talking about the ruins of whole cities, these enormous reservoirs and stunning temples. They tell a massive story, all without saying a word. They're proof of incredible engineering skills, really sophisticated art, and you can even figure out what daily life was like just by looking at the layout of an ancient city. Okay, so we have our stories on one side and our stuff on the other. But the real magic, the real detective work, happens when you put them together. This is where we connect the clues and get that amazing aha moment. So how do they do it? Well, there's a method to the madness. Step 1. A historian reads in an old book that a certain king built a temple. Cool. Step 2. An archaeologist, maybe years later, digs up the ruins of a temple from that same exact time period. Okay, interesting. Step 3, and this is the most important one. They cross-reference. Do the clues match up? And if they do, you get to step 4. Building a real, verified historical story. This right here, this is the aha moment. Imagine you're reading about some ancient king in a chronicle. Okay, it's a cool story. But then an archaeologist digs up a chunk of stone from that exact time period at a specific place, and bam, the king's name is carved right on it. Suddenly, that story isn't just a story anymore. It's a fact. That's the payoff. All right, so let's bring it all home. Why does any of this matter? Why should we care about old sources and how they all fit together? So what's the big picture here? What should you remember from all this? First, history isn't some boring list of facts. It's a narrative, a story that's built piece by piece from clues. Second, every single source, whether it's a poem or a piece of pottery, has a story to tell. Third, we have to think critically, always asking who made this and why. And finally, at the end of the day, the past is just a giant puzzle, and learning about the sources lets all of us be the detectives trying to put it together. And that leaves me with one last question for you. We've spent all this time talking about ancient manuscripts and stone carvings, but just think about our world right now. Our emails, our texts, our social media posts, all our digital photos. What clues, what sources are we leaving behind for the historians of tomorrow? What story will our digital footprints tell about us? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.